We continue now at the top of Daf Lamed Ches Amud Aleph and Meseches Shevuos. This is Shevuos Daf 38a. On the previous summit, the Gemara was asking, in cases of Shevuos HaPikodim that involve land, and it can also apply to Shevuos HaEdus, in cases that involve land, is there carbon Shevuah or not? And the Gemara in the previous summit said that we can derive from our Mishnah that in fact the carbon Shevuah does not apply in cases of land, because the Mishnah by Shevuos HaPikodim specifically discusses a case of a shore of an ox, and so we can infer from there it applies to a shore, but it would not apply, for example, to a case involving an eved, because an eved is compared to land, and again, there is no carbon Shevuah when it comes to land. But the Gemara then said that from another part of the Mishnah, you can actually draw the opposite inference, because the Mishnah says Zeh HaKlal. Zeh HaKlal is usually an inclusion, and that would seemingly be coming to include a case of an eved, and so therefore there are contradictory inferences in the Mishnah, and the Gemara therefore now says Ela Meha Leka L'Mishma Mina. Rather, from this Mishnah, we really can't derive anything again, because there are contradictory inferences in this regard. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. The Mishnah said, Shevuos HaPikodim, Keitzad, how does Shevuos HaPikodim work? Tainli Pikodon sheyesh li biyadcha. The person says, give me the deposit that's mine, that's in your possession. And again, the person falsely denies that he has the Pikodon, he takes the oath. That's the case of Shevuos HaPikodim. And the Gemara says, Tanu Rabban, and the rabbis taught, Kalal eino chayev el achas. Let's say the way the denial works is it works in a general fashion, so then he's only going to be liable to one. He's only going to have to bring one carbon. But let's say he denies it in a specific fashion, so chayev al kol achas v'achas, then he's going to be chayev on every single denial, a separate carbon shvuah. Divrei Rabbi Meir, these are the words of Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Yehuda says, shvuah lo lecha v'lo lecha v'lo lecha. If he says an oath that I don't have what's yours, and I don't have what's yours, and I don't have what's yours, so then chayev al kol achas v'achas, then he's chayev on every single denial, a separate carbon. Rabbi Eliezer says, lo lecha v'lo lecha v'lo lecha Shavuot. Let's say the way he phrases it is he says not to you and not to you and not to you, and he ends with the word Shavuot in oath. So that's when we say chayev al kol achas v'achas. That's when he's chayev on every single one. And finally, Rabbi Shimon says at sheyomar Shavuot l'chol achas v'achas. He has to say Shavuot on every single one in order for there to be individual liabilities for each denial. And Rashi explains, Kolal eino chayev el achas l'kamei meforish. The Gemara as it goes on will explain my kolal or my part. What exactly does it mean a general denial, and what exactly does it mean a specific denial? And the Gemara continues and explains, Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel. Rav Yehuda says that Shmuel says, Klolo shel Rabbi Meir. When the Rabbi Meir talks about the general denial, that is Proto shel Rabbi Yehuda. That's the same as the specific denial of Rabbi Yehuda. And the same is the opposite, Klolo shel Rabbi Yehuda. The general denial of Rabbi Yehuda, Proto shel Rabbi Meir, is actually the specific denial of Rabbi Meir. And Rashi explains, Klolo shel Rabbi Meir, Zehu Proto shel Rabbi Yehuda. Again, the general denial of Rabbi Meir would be considered specific as far as Rabbi Yehuda is concerned. It means as follows: Ma'isha Shama Rabbi Yehuda. What happened was, in this brayse, says Rabbi Yehuda heard something that Rabbi Meir had said. Shaya os Rabbi Meir klal. So Rabbi Meir had said some particular case is considered to be a klal. It's considered to be a general denial. Dahainu v'lo lecha v'lo lecha. That's actually exactly the case that Rabbi Yehuda mentions. Rabbi Yehuda mentions a case of lo lecha v'lo lecha v'lo lecha, and Rabbi Yehuda understands that to be a situation of parat where you're chayiv on each one. So Rabbi Yehuda had heard Rabbi Meir discussing that case, and so Asan Rabbi Yehuda prat. Rabbi Yehuda said that case is prat, even though Rabbi Meir would actually consider that case is klal. In other words, according to Rabbi Meir, Shavuot lo lecha v'lo lecha v'lo lecha, that's Rabbi Meir's case of klal, where it's eino chayev al achas, and Rabbi Yehuda says in that case, no, that's considered a case of prat, chayev al kol achas v'achas. And the reverse is also true, as Rashi now continues, umemela shaminan, and therefore we can understand also the Proto shel Rabbi Meir, that a case which Rabbi Meir would consider to be a prat case, a specific case, hainu lo lecha, that would be a case almost the same as lo lecha v'lo lecha, but here we're dropping the vav. In a situation where it's lo lecha, that Rabbi Meir actually considers that to be prat. That's considered to be a case of chayev al kol achas v'achas, and that's the case Rabbi Yehuda actually would say that since there's no vav according to Rabbi Yehuda, he would say the opposite. He would say that's a case that's considered klal. And Rashi continues, the lo, my have a prat Rabbi Meir. If you don't say that, what exactly is the prat? What exactly is the specific that Rabbi Meir is referring to? Because Rabbi Meir does mention a prat. He says in a case of prat, chayev al kol achas v'achas. So there has to be some prat of Rabbi Meir. V'hu klalo shel Rabbi Yehuda, and it has to be some kind of prat which Rabbi Yehuda can consider to be a klal. De'i lo l'cha Rabbi Yehuda nami prat, because if lo l'cha according to Rabbi Yehuda is also considered prat. If Rabbi Yehuda says lo l'cha v'lo l'cha is considered prat, and lo l'cha is considered prat, v'lo chashiva klal elo she'ein lochem, and then we would say that he only considers klal to be a case of she'ein lochem. Let's say you say it in plural, that would be a case of klal. Everybody could understand that. So ma'ishna v'lo l'cha denakat. So why is he specifically saying the case of v'lo l'cha? Meaning to say, if Rabbi Yehuda holds that it's prat, whether you say lo l'cha v'lo l'cha, or whether you say lo l'cha lo l'cha, if that's what Rabbi Yehuda holds, so then in reality he's saying that in both of those cases it's prat. And why choose just one of those cases? The fact that the fact that Rabbi Yehuda is choosing just the case of lo l'cha v'lo l'cha would imply that only that's considered prat, and lo l'cha is considered to be klal according to Rabbi Yehuda. And Rabbi Meir says exactly the opposite. Lo l'cha v'lo l'cha, that's the case that's considered to be klal, and lo l'cha that's the case that's considered to be prat according to Rabbi Meir. And the Gemara continues with another understanding of the machlokas between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yochanan Amar, Rabbi Yochanan says, Hakol modim, everybody agrees. Bevelo l'cha, in the case of velo l'cha, which Rabbi Yehuda mentions, shehu prat. Everybody agrees that that is prat. That's a case where we say chayev al kol achas v'achas. Lo nechliku ela belo l'cha. The only machlokas between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda is by a situation of lo l'cha. She Rabbi Meir omer prat. Rabbi Meir says that is considered to be prat as well. He says both of those scenarios are considered to be prat. For Rabbi Yehuda omer klal, and Rabbi Yehuda would say no, in a situation of lo l'cha, that actually would be considered klal. That would be a general denial. Now, according to Rabbi Meir, who says both lo l'cha and v'lo l'cha are considered to be prat, ve'eza u'klalo shel Rabbi Meir, according to this approach, what is the klal of Rabbi Meir? That would be the case that Rashi just mentioned above, where it said in plural, Shevuos she'ein lochem biyadi. That's if the person takes an oath that I don't have to you, he uses the word lochem in plural. That would be a case of klal according to Rabbi Meir. And Rashi explains, Hakol modim b'v'lo l'cha shu prat. Everybody agrees by v'lo l'cha that is considered to be a prat. Rabbi Meir lo polagad Rabbi Yehuda b'v'lo l'cha. Again, according to this approach, Rabbi Meir is not arguing on Rabbi Yehuda in a case of v'lo l'cha. V'hachi kamer Rabbi Yehuda, and this is what Rabbi Yehuda is saying. V'lo l'cha hu have a prat of v'lo l'cha, that's considered prat. Avol lo l'cha, but if it's just lo l'cha without the vav, klala, then it's a klal, and Rashi here gives the reasoning why. The lo ashvua kai, because then it's not going on the part where he said shvua, where he said there's an oath. Meaning to say, when a person says an oath and says lo l'cha, v'lo l'cha, so then each lo l'cha is going back on the shvua. It's like an independent shvua. But when the person just says lo l'cha, so that's considered to be a klal. That's what Rabbi Yehuda was saying. Well, the kamei mefarish mehecha dayik Rabbi Yochanan, and later on the Gemara will explain from where does Rabbi Yochanan infer this, the tarvayul Rabbi Meir prati havi, that both scenarios are considered prat according to Rabbi Meir. And the Gemara continues, B'mai kamiflagi, what exactly are they arguing about in terms of interpreting this machlokas between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda? And the Gemara explains, Shmuel dayik mi brisa. Shmuel makes an inference from the way the brisa is phrased. Rabbi Yochanan dayik mi masnisin, and Rabbi Yochanan actually makes the inference from the Mishnah, as the Gemara now explains. Shmuel dayik mi brisa. Shmuel makes the inference from the brisa as follows: Mideka'ama Rabbi Yehuda v'lo l'cha prata have. From the fact that Rabbi Yehuda says that the case of v'lo l'cha is considered to be prat, is considered to be specified, so Mechlal then implies the Shomei Rabbi Meir Damar Klala Have, that he heard that Rabbi Meir said that in that exact case it's actually considered to be a case of klal. In other words, it makes sense to say that whatever case Rabbi Yehuda is stating, that's the case that he's arguing with Rabbi Meir on. V'yamar le Rabbi Yehuda Prata Have, and Rabbi Yehuda is saying to Rabbi Meir, in that case which you think is klal, I'm telling you that that case is prat. That's how Shmuel understands the brisa. Now, how does Rabbi Yochanan understand the brisa? For Rabbi Yochanan Amar, Rabbi Yochanan says, no, tarvayu Rabbi Meir prata have. Actually, Rabbi Meir held both the case of lo l'cha and v'lo l'cha are considered prat. V'yamar le Rabbi Yehuda, and all Rabbi Yehuda is saying to him as he's telling him the case where he agrees. B'v'lo l'cha modina lach. He's telling him, I agree with you on v'lo l'cha. That's why he mentions v'lo l'cha. But below l'cha paligna alach. But in the case of lo l'cha, I actually argue. I say that that case is a klal. Ushmuel, now Shmuel responds to Rabbi Yochanan, that doesn't really make sense. Why would Rabbi Yehuda respond with the case that he agrees with? Instead of admitting to him and stating the case which you agree with, what he should be doing is responding about the case that he argues with. Usually when a Tana is responding to a previous Tana, he responds with his argument, not with the case in which they agree. Rashi explains, Shmuel Amar Loch, instead of him admitting, he should be arguing. Kolomar means to say, if that's true, that Rabbi Yehuda heard Rabbi Meir say both cases are prat, he shouldn't then choose his words by the case of velolach and saying he admits there. What he should have said was as follows. It should have said as follows in the Brisa. Rabbi Yehuda says, Lolacha eino chayev elachas, that the case of Lolacha is going to be chayev one. Leminkat milsa de polagale begava. He should have chosen the case in which he argues. And the Gemara continues, Rabbi Yochanan daik mimas nisin, and Rabbi Yochanan, he infers from our Mishnah. Midikamer Rabbi Meir, from the fact that Rabbi Meir says in the Mishnah, now it's not really Rabbi Meir in the Mishnah, it's actually unattributed, but as Rashi notes, Stam Mishnah is generally assumed to be Rabbi Meir. So from the fact that it says in the Mishnah, Shavua she'ein lochem biyadi, in the Mishnah it has a case of she'ein lochem in plural, so in that case, klol ahave, and that's the case that the Mishnah chooses, which it says is a case of klal, mechlal de velo lecha prat ahave. That would imply that it's only in the situation of she'ein lochem that's considered to be a klal, but in a case of velo lecha, for example, Rabbi Meir would say prat. Again, according to Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Meir says prat whether it's velo lecha or whether it's lo lecha. The izal gadaitach, because if it should enter your mind velo lecha klal ahave, that Rabbi Meir holds velo lecha is also considered a general denial. At the Mishmalon Shvuah she'ein lochem biyadi, instead of giving us a case in the Mishnah of Shvuah she'ein lochem, nashmin on Shvuah lo lecha velo lecha velo lecha. Rather, the Mishnah should have taught us a case of lo lecha velo lecha velo lecha, and kol she'ein Shvuah she'ein lochem biyadi, and certainly that would have been true by a situation of she'ein lochem, and so therefore you can infer from the Mishnah that only in a case of she'ein lochem does Rabbi Meir say that it's considered to be a klal. Shmuel Amar, and Shmuel says back to that, Kol ha'omer velo lecha, anytime someone says velo lecha, ka'omer shvuah she'ein lachem biyadi dami, that is similar to saying ein lachem biyadi. That's what the Mishnah actually means to say. And the Gemara continues and brings a proof to Rabbi Yochanan from our Mishnah. Tanan, we learn in our Mishnah, lo lecha velo lecha velo lecha. It has a case of lo lecha velo lecha velo lecha, which it says in the Mishnah it's considered to be a prat. Again, we're assuming that this line in the Mishnah is also Rabbi Meir, and so if it's saying that lo lecha velo lecha velo lecha is considered to be prat, that's what Rabbi Yochanan said. Shmuel would say that that situation is actually considered to be klal, and the Gemara says Tani, instead, according to Shmuel, you have to learn the Mishnah with a different girsa, with a different text. It should be lo lecha. It shouldn't be velo lecha. It should be lo lecha, because again, according to Shmuel, Rabbi Meir would agree that lo lecha is considered to be prat. The Gemara continues, Tashma, coming here another proof from the Mishnah. Tainli pikadon usasum es yad v'gezel v'aveda. Here also the vavs are used, and we're considering them to be separate. That seems to be a proof for Rabbi Yochanan. And again, the Gemara gives the same answer. Tani, you're going to learn it according to Shmuel as follows: Tasum es yod gezel v'aveda. Just take out the vavs. That's how Shmuel will have to learn. The Gemara continues with another proof along the same lines. Tashma, coming here that the Mishnah said ten lichitin usa orin v'kusmin. It uses the vavs again. It seems to be a proof to Rabbi Yochanan. And the Gemara again answers on behalf of Shmuel. Tani, rather it should say in the Mishnah sa'orin kusmin. It should say sa'orin kusmin without the vav. But the Gemara continues, V'hai Tana kol hachi shavish tani v'azal. According to this, the Tana of our Mishnah is making mistakes over and over again. Constantly you're going to say the Mishnah is including vavs when it should not include vavs, so therefore this is not a good answer to the question against Shmuel. And so instead the Gemara says, Elo hamani, rather what we'll say is, who is the author of the Mishnah? It's actually not Rabbi Meir at all, and so therefore there's no problem for Shmuel at all, because who is the author of the Mishnah? Rebbe. The Mishnah is actually following Rebbe. Diyamar loshna kezayis veloshna kezayis ukezayis. Rebbe's shita happens to be, we'll see Rashi in a moment, that it doesn't matter if you say without a vav like kezayis, or say it with a vav like kezayis ukezayis, prata havi. It's always considered to be specific according to Rebbe. And Rashi explains, again, as we mentioned, Stam Masnisin Rabbi Meir, generally an unattributed Mishnah is considered to be Rabbi Meir. Tanan, we learned in our Mishnah, Velo Lecha, it says it with the Vav, Garsinan Bekulat, always says the Vav, Almol Rabbi Meir Pratahavi. See, according to Rabbi Meir, with the Vav is considered a Prat, Utiyuf to the Shmuel, that would be a refutation of Shmuel, who says that in such a case it's a Klal. And so again, the Gemara went on to amend the Mishnah and say that you should just take out the Vavs, but the Gemara said you can't do that throughout the whole Mishnah. So instead the Gemara said, Rebbe Hida Amar, rather the author of those lines in the Mishnah is not Rabbi Meir, it's actually Rebbe, because Rebbe says Meseches Zvachim bePerek Sheni. This is Rebbe, the sheet of Rebbe is found in Meseches Zvachim in the second Perek, and we're talking here about a situation of Pigel, which is having an improper thought, an improper machshava, when doing an avod in the Beis HaMikdash. And so Rebbe says, he says, Lo shna shochet es hazevach. It doesn't matter if the person slaughters the animal, the carbon, al menas lechol kezayis lemachar, in order to, let's say he has in mind that he's going to eat the kezayis tomorrow, that's at the wrong time, or kezayis bachutz, or he's going to eat the kezayis outside of the area where it's supposed to be eaten. And lo shna kezayis lemachar u kezayis bachutz. It doesn't matter if he uses a vav. It doesn't make a difference if he says kezayis bachutz or u kezayis bachutz. We're still going to say prat have it. We're still going to say it's considered to be specific, and what that means is beis machshavos hein. It's going to be considered two separate machshavos. V'tafis es harishon, and we actually say that the first one is the one we should take seriously. The first one is the one where he has an improper time. The thought is that he's saying al manas lechol kezayis lemachar. We're going to take that one as the serious one, so to speak. V'have pigel, that's considered pigel because an improper time, eating it outside the proper time, is considered the classic case of pigel. V'shuv ein machshava shniya motziyaso midei pigel. And now that second thought that he had, where he said kezayis bachutz or u kezayis bachutz, does not take it out from being pigel. Aliba de Rabbi Yehuda, this all follows the sheet of Rabbi Yehuda, Diyamar Hasim, because Rabbi Yehuda is the one that says over there, Zeh HaKlal, that the general rule is, Kol shemachsheves hazman kidma lemachsheves hamakam, as long as the thought, the improper thought of the timing, is what came first before the improper thought of the location, so pigel, that's considered to be pigel, v'chayav and alachilasu kares, and the person is then chayiv when he eats it, he's chayiv kares. That's the case of pigel that gets kares. Umasnis and dehacha Rebbehi v'lav Rebbe Meir, and therefore the Mishnah over here is actually following Rebbe, and it is not following Rebbe Meir. And the Gemara continues, Tashma mididei, coming here a proof from the Mishnah from Rebbe Meir's actual words. Here Rebbe Meir is actually quoted in the Mishnah. The Mishnah says, Rebbe Meir says, Afilu chita usa ora v'kusemes chayev al kolachas v'achas, even if he says the wheat and the barley and the kusemes and the spelt, so he's chayev on each one. Here the vav is used, and we're saying it's considered to be prat. Again, that seems to be a proof to Rebbe Yochanan. And the Gemara again answers, Tani chita saora kusemes. The way that it should be taught in the Mishnah, according to Shmuel, is chita saora kusemes without the vav, and that's why it's considered to be prat, again, according to Shmuel's understanding. The Gemara asks, Maya afilu, what exactly does afilu mean in the Mishnah? Rebbe Meir says, even in a situation of chita saora kusemes. Now, the Gemara's understanding is that it has something to do with the fact that it's said in the singular, and so the Gemara answers, Amar Ravacha Breder Ravika, Ravacha the son of Ravika says, afilu chita bechlal chitin, even chita, one kernel of wheat, is included in chitin in the plural of wheat. Usaora, let's say again, it means one grain of barley, bechlal saorin, that's considered as part of saorin barley. The kusemis, or if he says kusemis in the singular, bechlal kusmin, that's included in kusmin in the plural, and we'll see Rashi's understanding of this part of the Gemara. Chita bechlal chitin, the wheat is included in the wheat in plural, means to say as follows, imtanu chita. Rashi understands we're talking about the claimant, what the person making the claim is saying. If he claims a chita and he uses the singular, harehu ketanu chitin, that's identical to claiming chitin in the plural. Just because he uses the singular doesn't mean that he's claiming one kernel of wheat. It's the same thing as saying chitin. Kedichsiv, and Rashi says, as we find written in the pasuk, v'achita v'akusemes lo nuku, even though it's technically written in the singular, clearly there it's referring to wheat and spelt, it's referring to it as plural, as many. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. The Mishnah said, Tainli pikadon usasu mesiyad gezel va'aveda sheyesh li biyadcha. The person says, give me the pikadon and the loan and that which was stolen, that which was lost, that you have of mine. And then the Mishnah goes on to make a distinction between cases of, let's say, Tainli chitin usaorin, where the person has a general denial where he's chayiv only one, or where he has specific denials where he's chayiv on each and every one. And the Gemara says, Tainli chitin usaorin, again, that's how the Mishnah goes on, give me the wheat and the barley. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, and Rabbi Rabbi Yochanan says on that, pruta mikulam mitzdarefes, a pruta from all of them is going to join together. Rabbi Yochanan essentially is saying it doesn't need to be that the chitin is worth a pruta on its own, but it can join together the chitin, the seorin, and the kusmin. If they're all worth a pruta, that's considered to be a substantial denial, and then we're going to say that there is going to be a liability in terms of Shevuos HaPikadon. Rashi explains, Pruta mikulan mitzdarefes im ein lo olav mikulan. If the only claim he has on him from all of them together is ela shava pruta, is just a shava pruta, mitzdarfen l'chayvo, that's enough. You can combine those together in order to be mechayev the person. And the Gemara will now continue and explain what case exactly are we going on. Are we talking about by the general denial, or are we talking about when he denies each one specifically? As the Gemara now continues and explains, pligi bar Ravacha v'Ravina. There's a machlokus about this between Ravacha and Ravina. And Rashi says, Pligi bar Ravacha v'Ravina b'masnisin uvamil said Rabbi Yochanan. They're arguing on the Mishnah, and also it's relevant to what Rabbi Yochanan just said. And the machlokas is as follows. Chad Amar 1 says, Aprati mechayiv, that in general, when a person denies, so then he's chayiv on the specifics that he denied. Aklali lo mechayiv, but there's not an additional mechayiv, there's not an additional liability on the general denial. What this opinion is saying is that if a person makes these specific individual denials, so that's all that there's a liability for. You don't also have another liability for just the general denial. But the other one says, no, aklali nami mechayiv. Even when you're chayiv specifically for each one, there still is also a liability for that general denial. Essentially, according to this opinion, there's simply an additional carbon that is brought in this case. As Rashi explains, Chad Amar aprati mechayiv, aklali lo mechayiv. One says you're only chayiv on the prati and not the klali. Means to say as follows. Let's say chayiv al kol achas v'achas. Let's say you have a case, again, a situation where you're talking about wheat, barley, and spelt, so you're chayiv on each one. The kotani masnis and chayiv, it says in the Mishnah chayiv over there on each one. Shalosh ka'amar, so over there we mean to say chayiv shalosh, that you're chayiv 3. Chada achitin, v'chada asorin, v'chada kusman. You're going to be chayiv on the denial of the wheat, and of the barley, and on of the spelt. Arba lo mechayavin le, but we don't say you're chayiv a 4th because of just the general denial. We don't say that the phrase of shvua that I don't have is considered its own shvua. Shekol alba ein lecha biyadi klum, where he's now saying I don't have anything of yours. V'chazaru parad, and then he goes ahead and specifies lo chitin, v'lo kusmin, v'lo saorin. I don't have wheat, not spelt, not barley. Ela prata peirusha the shvua she'ein lech biyadihu. According to this opinion, no, the prata, that which he's specifying, is really just an explanation of what he said originally of the shvua. So there's only really 3 denials and 3 liabilities. Now, according to this approach, when Rabbi Yochanan says we can combine all 3, the wheat and the barley and the spelt, into one pruta, that would lav aseifa de masnisin. That cannot be going according to this approach on the end of the Mishnah. It cannot be going on the case where you chayiv on each one. Because again, according to this approach, since each shvua is independent, an independent shvua on the chitin and on the seor and on the kusmin, so lo mitzdarfa, you cannot be going there, you can't combine. Ela areisha amar shvua she'en lach biyadi eino chayiv ela achas. That would just be going on the first case of the Mishnah, where there was a general denial and only a general denial. So then we would say pruta mikulan mitzdarefes losa shvua. Then we would say a pruta from each one that can all be combined. Because over there again it's all one. That would be according to that approach. The Chadamer, but the other one says no. Chayiv al kol achas v'achas tekatani masnisin. When the Mishnah says chayiv on each one, dalin, there's actually 4 liabilities. Chada klala, because there's always going to be a liability on the general denial. Utelos the prata, and then there's going to be 3 on the specifics. With Rabbi Yochanan aseifa nami kaim, according to this approach, what Rabbi Yochanan said would go on that end case of the Mishnah as well, because there is a general shvua, and it would just be going on the general shvua. V'ashvuasa dechlala umechayiv miyachad, and we'd be going on the case of the general denial, where at least you'd be chayiv 1 if it's not a pruta, if each thing is not worth a pruta. So there's not going to be specific liability for the chitin, specific liability for the barley, and specific liability for the kusman, but you can combine them all for at least a general liability, at least as one. And so that's the machlokus. Basically, the machlokus really is whether there's always that additional general liability or no. In a case where there's specific liability, that's all there is. There's no additional general liability. And so the Gemara continues, V'atani Rabbi Chia, but didn't Rabbi Chia teach, Harekan Chomesh Esrei Chatos, that in this case, there are 15 Chatos. V'imisa, now if it's true that there's general liability, in Rabbi Chia's case, we'll see Rashi in a moment, so Esrim Havion, so then there really should be 20 liabilities, not just 15, there should be 20 Karbonos. And the Gemara says, Hai Tana de Prate Kachashav de Klali Lo Kachashav. Well, for this we could just say that this Tana over here was only counting in the 15, the specifics, but there is a general as well, just that this Tana was not counting the general. Rashi explains Tesvav Chatos, again in this brisa there are 15 Chatos, Hayu Chamisha, Tov and Oso, let's say there are 5 different claimants. So 5 claimants, and each one is making 3 claims. And again, each one is saying Chitin, Sor, and Kusman, and there's that specific denial. So you have 5 times 3, a total of 15 Chatos. And we should note over here, it's not actually a carbon Chatos. What the Gemara just means is a carbon over here. Actually, the carbon is an Asham, as we've mentioned by Shevuos HaPikadon. So again, if you're really going to say that for each one is going to be for the general as well, so then you should have 20, and it should not just be 15. What it really should be is it should be 5 times 4, and not 5 times 3. And so the Gemara answered, Deklali Loka Chashav, we're not counting the general. Afagav Deisnu, even though there really are 20, there really is a general as well, but we're not counting that. But the Gemara continues and asks, V'atani Rabbi Chia, but didn't Rabbi Chia also teach Harekan Esrim Chatos? There's a different brisa which says that there are Esrim Chatos, that there are 20. And Rashi says, V'atani Rabbi Chia Beduchta Acharisi, in a different place Rabbi Chia taught, Harekan Chaf, that there are 20, Shma Mino Dalid Shevuos, so that shows that there are 4. Uvekamaisa Lo Chashav Dechlala, and in the first one we're not counting the klal, and so then you have a proof in the opposite direction. Here you have a proof that actually there is going to be a liability when it comes to the general. And the Gemara says to that, it could be that in that second brisa, Hahi Apikadonu Sasum Asyad Vegezel Via Aveda. In that case, we're going on Pikadon Sasum Asyad Gezel and Aveda, so there actually were 4, and that's why it ended up being 5 times 4 in that situation. It wasn't going on a case of Chitin, Saor, and Kusman. It was going on Pikadon Sasum Asyad Gezel and Aveda, and that's why it ended up being a higher number. Rashi says, Umashani Liolam Tlasin, and we answer that really it could be there's just 3. Dahi Dechlala Lesa, and really again we're not counting the general. V'chikatani Esrim Apikadon Atasum Asyad Agezel Via Aveda, and over there when it says 20, maybe it actually is going just on the specifics. It's going on Pikadon Tasum Asyad Gezel and Aveda, Diga Dalid Prati, where there were 4 specifics, L'chol Chad V'chad for each one, to have Elu Esrim, which ended up being a total of 20, and so therefore you can't bring a proof one way or another from these brises of Rabbi Chia. And the Gemara continues, Boy Minei Rava Mer of Nachman. Rava asked Rav Nachman the following question, Hayu Chamisha Tov and Oso, let's say there are 5 people making a claim from him. V'yamru lo, they say to him, Tein lanu pikadon tasum asyad v'gezel v'aveda sheyesh lanu biyadcha. Give us the pikadon, the deposit, and the tasum asyad, the loan, and the gezel, which is the stolen object, and the aveda, the lost object, which is ours, which you have. Amar le'echad mehan. Now let's say he says to one of them, Shvuah she'en lach biyadi pikadon tasum asyad gezel v'aveda. He says there's a shvuah that I don't have your pikadon tasum asyad Gezel and Aveda, velo lecha, velo lecha, velo lecha, velo lecha, and then he says velo lecha, not to you, not to you, not to you, not to you. So mahu, so what's the halacha in that case? Achad mechayev, is there liability only on one? And Rashi explains achad mechayev akol chad v'chad mehanoch basroi de velo lecha de ka'amar lava prata de bikadon tesumas yad koi. When he says over there on each one to these later people, he says velo lecha, not to you, not to you. It wasn't going on the specifics of the pikadon tesumas yad, etc. Ve'ein kan eloches chatos, and if you're not going to say it goes on each of the specifics, so then maybe there would be only a total of 8 karbonos in this case, because dalin mishum rishon, because the first person that he turned to, there you have a liability for all 4. In other words, to the first person, he was saying that I don't have pikadon, tesumas yod, gezel, and aveda, and so therefore there was 4 denials, so you have 4 liabilities. But then maybe on velo lecha, it was just considered to be one general denial for each, and so therefore v'echad l'chol echad min achronim, for those last 4 people, it would just be 1 liability, so maybe there's just a total of 8 liabilities over there, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Lamed Ches Amid Beis.